Hi there, it's Jeff here with a video for AQA Microeconomics. Let's spend a few minutes together thinking about aspects of economic methodology. So if you've chosen economics as an A-level or an IB subject, you've chosen a social science. That means we're really focused on the behaviour of people and groups, including businesses, and how those decisions, how those choices feed through to affect the way that markets and ultimately the whole economy works. Now, in contrast with natural sciences such as physics and chemistry, economics basically studies how people make choices, how they engage and interact with each other. Often their behaviour is interdependent, and then how this shapes outcomes. So economics is about human behaviour. It's not just, hopefully, numbers or equations. So, for example, how do people respond to the decision by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to expand the ultra-low emissions zone? What kind of consequences might that policy have? How have people actually responded to the threat, the big challenge of the cost of living crisis in the UK? Well, here's some data based on survey evidence for 2023 showing that nearly 2/3 of people have spent less on non-essentials. That tells us something, for example, about income elasticity of demand, a topic you'll come across later. People are shopping around more for better deals. That involves there's a cost to doing that. Nearly 45% of people using less fuel, obviously, in response to the energy price shock. People using up savings, cutting back on non-essential journeys, for example. So economics is about behaviour. It's about the choices that people make and often have to make when they're in dire circumstances. Economics is about human behaviour. How might the government over time increase the take-up of electric cars as part of its net zero strategy? Of course, they've introduced a ban on sales of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. But what other incentives, what other policies might improve that? At another level, how might a ban on disposable vapes change consumer behaviour? In some countries, such a ban has already been introduced, and countries including England, Wales and Scotland thinking about doing the same. Now, there are some similarities to natural sciences such as physics and chemistry. Both natural sciences and economics rely heavily on empirical observation. What that means is you go out into the field and you try to gather data and evidence. So economists might be getting data on prices for the consumer price index, which then feeds into the inflation number. We need some data on production, such as new house building, what's happening in the labour market, how many people have a job, what are people spending their money on, are they spending online or are they spending in stores, for example. Both natural and economic social sciences use data analysis. So you're looking to try and identify patterns, economic relationships, are they positive, negative? Trends and data will be important as you go through your course. Economists tend to use statistical techniques to analyse data. It's known as econometrics. But don't worry, you'll only come across that if and when you study economics at university. And indeed, natural sciences and social sciences such as economics both use mathematical models. So we're trying to make our models more realistic, both to analyse and perhaps to predict economic behaviour. For example, how do people respond to a tax change? Some people think, I was reading just this morning the case for a tax on meat as a way of improving sustainability in farming. Well, if we brought in a new meat tax, a tax on consumers of processed meat, how would that affect people's behaviour? Of course, just recently, a few years ago, we brought in a sugar tax on high sugar drinks. One response was that drink manufacturers such as Iron Brew and Coca-Cola, they reformulated their drinks to reduce the sugar content. So economics uses modelling to make forecasts. For example, if you're following the news at the moment, will an increase in interest rates help to reduce inflation? Here's the chart. The blue line shows the rate of inflation in the UK. And of course, that shot up during 2022, mainly because of food and energy prices rocketing. It's now starting to fall. The central bank, the Bank of England, has been raising interest rates from effectively 0 to 5% and above. So economics is about trying to model the consequences of higher interest rates. If you follow that histogram, has that increase in interest rates eventually shown through in a fall in inflation? And if it has, why does that happen? Another model might be to model the impact of a fall in house prices. Now, property prices have been rising very strongly for the best part of a decade, but as you can see, house prices now starting to fall on average in the UK. So economists would use methodology to try to forecast some of the consequences of that. Economics is very different, however, to natural sciences. So in natural sciences, physics and chemistry, they often conduct controlled experiments in lab conditions. They can manipulate variables to establish causal relationships. Now, in economics, although we do use laboratory experiments, and often university students are paid to do that, controlled experiments are rare. So typically, economists tend to rely more heavily on observational data. And the predictability, of course, is an issue. So natural sciences tend to have a higher degree of predictability because of physical laws, whereas, of course, we're dealing with human behaviour. And that's unpredictable, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's influenced by lots of social, cultural, psychological factors. During your study of economics, you'll come across behavioural economics, big part of AQA, and behavioural economics challenges the assumptions of traditional theory about how people behave. One aspect of economics which is worth knowing about is the growing use of randomised controlled trials, RCTs. Now, these are an attempt to use controlled data experiments to judge the effectiveness of policies and interventions. So randomised control, you have a treatment group or a control group which does not have the intervention, and then you compare the outcome of two groups between the treatment and the control group. And that allows you to isolate the impact of the policy being studied and avoiding things like selection bias or confounding variables. So, for example, what works? What encourages people to save? What types of aid are best in low-income countries? What kind of interventions work best if there's a natural disaster such as an earthquake? Is it giving cash directly, or is it pumping food and clothing into the local affected economy? What policies are best to get parents to immunise their children, for example? Now, I just want to alert you to the work of Esther Duflo, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics for her work on randomised controlled trials. So this has been heavily used, of course, in the past in medicine to judge the efficacy and effectiveness of new drugs, including the COVID virus and the vaccines there. Esther Duflo and her colleagues, including Kramer and Banerjee, they used randomised controlled trials to test interventions, conditional cash transfers, giving parents cash if they have their kids immunised, little interventions to do with microfinance. Really interesting economics. Now, part of the methodology of economics is the use of assumptions. So what's an assumption? Well, an assumption is basically something we do. We make an assumption to simplify the world and then to help build and develop theories that, in theory, help to explain economic behaviour. So traditional theory assumes that consumers are rational. The choices that people make are designed to maximise their own utility or satisfaction. And those kind of theories, those assumptions, then get built into discussions about how price affects behaviour. But of course, lots of theories challenge the idea of rationality. So once you challenge the assumption that people are always rational, you end up with a different theory, a different model that perhaps can help explain the world a little better. One of the assumptions you'll come across quite quickly in your economics course is the CETERIS PARIBUS assumption. All that means is all other things being equal, we hold other things constant. So we do that to isolate the effect of a specific variable whilst keeping other relevant factors constant. So, for example, the law of demand. Other things being equal, or ceteris paribus, when the price of a good or service decreases, the quantity demand goes up. If price goes up, quantity demand goes down. However, lots of other factors affect demand for fresh food or whatever it is, or foreign holidays. Incomes, tastes and preferences, the prices of substitutes and complements. So we hold those factors constant. Supply and price. Normally, when the price goes up, other factors remaining the same, producers are more likely to want to increase supply to make more money. But many factors affect supply, the cost of production, technologies available, government taxes and subsidies. So because we want to isolate the effect of price on supply, we hold those factors constant. Having got these two questions, which of the following best defines economics as a social science? You might want to press the pause button Which of these options do you think is right? Which of the following best defines economics as a social science? And the correct answer here is B. It's all about how we allocate our scarce resources better to satisfy our unlimited needs and wants. And question 2, when economists use the term ceteris paribus, what are they assuming? Have a go at question 2. So when economists use the term ceteris paribus, they're assuming that all factors except the ones being considered remain constant. In the next AQA video, we'll look at positive and normative statements. But thanks for joining me on this video.